In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to make an emoji keyboard that is connected to a text box. And here is an example here. We have an icon that we can click on, which then opens up an emoji menu, emoji keyboard of sorts. And when we click on one, it should populate the text area. In addition to this menu, we also have a header up here with some icons that represent other menu choices. So we'll be able to select through these, find an emoji that we want, click on it, and add it. So to get started, we'll go over to W3 Schools, and we'll go to their How-To section, look for the pop-up chat window, and we're not going to do the exact same thing that they're doing here, but we'll go ahead and just grab this box here, just to make it a little bit quicker to get the HTML and CSS. So I'm going to grab this and move it over to the Svelte REPL. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this close button and also clean up some of the CSS that we won't be using. Okay, so we have the basic HTML and CSS. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on how to get emojis to even show up. If you checked out my video called Password Generator, this dealt with a string method called fromCharCode. And what this allowed us to do, in fact, I'm going to console log this so we can see what the value is. This allows us to tap into the Unicode character set. And so I can put a number in here, let's say 98, and what comes back is the letter B, 97, the letter A. And I can just add numbers to here, and it will pull out the character that's at that place. Now, Unicode is a massive, massive character set. So when we get up to really, really high numbers where the emojis are, we actually have some trouble getting those to show up. In fact, here's a number that represents an emoji, but you can see nothing shows up. And the thing is that these emojis are larger than 16-bit, so this older method from CharCode doesn't render them properly. But luckily, JavaScript 2015 provided us a new method called fromCodePoint. Instead of fromCharCode, it's fromCodePoint. Now, as soon as I do that, it's able to recognize this, and it renders the emoji properly. Now, the other method that we can use just for testing purposes is called CodePointAt. And what this does is if we provide an emoji inside the string, and then this is asking for an index, so our string only has one character, so it's always going to be index 0. But if we put an emoji here, we can immediately get the Unicode number that it's at. So this is a picture of a brain. So if I grab this number and then put it in as the argument for fromCodePoint, you can see we get the brain. So we can use these two methods and these two consoles to just test out some values. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, now that we know how to actually get an emoji with this method, let's go ahead and set up an array. We'll set up an array called emoji sets, and this will be filled with objects, and each object will have a type which will kind of be the classification. So this emoji set's going to be of faces, and we'll also put a min key, and min key will represent a number. And so for faces, we'll start with this number here, and the max value that we'll end at will be here. Now, in order to see what this character set is, we'll create a for loop. And what we'll do is, instead of connecting min to here, what we'll do is we'll set up some variables here. So we'll create a Svelte reactive variable that we'll also call min. And what that will do is it'll access this value here. So we'll do emoji sets. And because we only have one index we'll put 0, and then we'll put min. In fact, why don't we just call this min value? We'll call this max val, so there's no confusion. And so this variable is accessing this, and then this loop is using this value right here. And then we'll set up another reactive variable called max, and we'll practically do the same thing, but we'll change this to max val. Okay, so this loop is tying into these reactive variables, and then let's just set up a console log. And we'll use this same exact method, and we'll put I as its argument. Now we get an error here, cannot access min before initialization. And what this is warning us about is that this loop right here has values that are relying on these reactive values. And these reactive values are relying on these values. So that's a sign to us as Svelte users that this for loop also needs to be reactive. And as soon as we do that, then you can see the emojis print themselves out. And so this is going to be our first emoji menu set here. Now let's work on getting these to show up actually on the web page here. And so down in our HTML, and so I'm just going to make a simple div with a span tag in it. And in this span tag is where we'll put each emoji. But in order to get these emojis to show up on the DOM here, why don't we go ahead and also create another array which will store all of these emojis. And so we'll, instead of console logging this, what we'll do is we'll take emojis and we'll add one of these emojis one at a time to this array. So this loop is actually going through and changing each of the numbers to actual emojis, and those actual emojis are now being stored in this array. And so now with this array, let's come down into the HTML and we'll do in each loop. And inside the span tags, that's where we'll put the emoji. And now we got them showing up on the web page. So let's go ahead and just add a little bit of CSS to clean this up a bit. Okay, good. So we got them showing up properly as kind of a menu, and we can even click on them and there's an active state. Now, of course, they don't do anything yet, and we'll set that functionality up later. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make this menu a modal, so it'll be toggleable. So what we'll do is we'll adjust the send button, and we'll put a little icon here that we can click, and when that icon gets clicked, this menu will show up. So let's adjust that. So in the HTML, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the HTML around the button. We'll go ahead and place this inside a div. And so now we have some room to add a little icon here. So I'll add some HTML to include that. And what we'll do is we'll call this emoji icon, and we'll create this up in our script tags here. And we'll use this same method, and we'll choose this specific icon. And I'll go ahead and style it a little bit. So we'll be styling this div right here. Okay, so now we can go ahead and click on this icon, and what we'll do is we'll only show this menu here. Well, let's go ahead and first hide it. What we'll do is we'll tuck this emoji menu inside an if block. Now it doesn't know what modal open is, so let's go ahead and make that up here. We'll set it to false, because that's what we start out with, but you can see if we set it to true, then it shows up. So we'll put it back to false, and the idea is that when we click on this icon, which is right here, we'll add an on-click event listener. And we want to say that modal open, the Boolean we just created, we'll set that to true. So when we click it, it opens. Next thing we can do is we can add a little bit of a transition to this menu. So when this clicks, we'll have this fly in from the top. So we'll use Svelte's transitions. We'll import the fly transition. And we'll put that on this menu here. So we'll put transition, colon, fly, and then we'll take the y-axis and we'll have it come from above. So that's why we put a negative number. So now if I click this, it flies from the top. If I click it again, well here, let's set modal not to true, but to the opposite of modal open. So good, now I can click on the cat and it'll do both. Now if I click it again, it flies out. So it flies in and then flies out. Now let me go ahead and clean up the HTML just a little bit. I'll add some section tags and some additional CSS. Okay, the next thing we want to do is, so right now we have one menu set of emojis. Let's go ahead and add some more to our emoji set array. So I went ahead and used this fromCodePoint and tested out several numbers and found several different ranges of numbers and then just added them to our emoji set. So now let's go ahead and add a header to this, and we'll add some icons in the header that will represent each of these emoji sets. So down in the HTML, just above this each loop, I'll add a header. And we'll have a div that will be for each of the icon sets. And we can go ahead and do that. We'll create this menu of icons that will represent each of these sets through a loop as well. We'll do that through an array as well. And so here we'll call this set icons. And in this array, we'll start with Unicode character numbers. And then we'll take this array, and down here in the header, we'll set up an each loop. And inside the divs, we'll add some Svelte curly brackets, and we'll put fromCodePoint right inside of these curly brackets because we can put JavaScript in there. And so what we want to pass in as the argument for fromCodePoint is the icon. And you remember, icon, you know what? Why don't we call this instead, or we'll call it Unicode. So this will take the Unicode and use this to render an emoji. So good, we have them rendering on the side here. Let's just add some CSS to clean that up. Okay, and then we'll also add a closer icon here right next to this last emoji. So up in the HTML, right below this each loop in the header, and I'll just put a big X there. And then we'll go ahead and add some CSS. Good, now we have an icon here. Now it doesn't work yet. Right now the cat opens and closes it, but let's make it so that the cat emoji opens it and the X icon closes it. So here's the div for the closer. We'll add an on click. And we'll do what we did here for the cat emoji. But instead of this, we'll make this false. So this, when we click the cat, it should be true. And when we come down here on the closer icon, we'll just make this false. So it's very definitive. This only opens it and this only closes it. Now let's add some functionality to these icon sets. So when I click the clown emoji, then our menu here should change. And so these are inside the header. So on each of these divs, let's add an ID, but we'll do it with the data attribute. So we'll call it data ID equals some Svelte curly braces, and then we'll use this index counter here. So now each of these emojis, this will be data ID 0, data ID 1, data ID 2. And we'll use those numbers to access these indexes for the emoji sets. So what we want to do is we want to click each of these in order to get the menu set to show up. So we'll put an on click here. And we'll make an event handler called choose emoji set. And let's come up into the script tags and we'll define this. Now we're going to need to use the event object. And what we want to do is we'll go ahead and console log e.target.dataset.id. So if I click this, you can see we get a string of 0, 1, 2, 3. Now we want to make sure we get a number. So let's go ahead and just use the number object to coerce that value to a number. Perfect. So what we want this function to do is we want it to basically set a value that we haven't made yet. And we'll call this selected set. So this will actually represent this value here, this index value. And so down in our handler function, instead of console logging, we'll just set selected set to be this number now. One thing that I forgot to do was when I copy and pasted these sets in, I forgot to change the keys. Great, so now when we use this handler function called choose emoji set, it will set selected set to a number. And if we do that, we can see that what's happening is it's getting appended to the previous emoji set. So what we really need to do is every time we select a new menu set is clear out the old emoji array here. So let's make another kind of helper function, and we'll just call this clear emoji, is it returns the emoji array empty. So what we can do is when we call choose emoji set, we'll call this function first. That empties this out, and then this number gets selected. This min and max value gets set. This loop runs. After this loop runs, these emojis get added, and then that gets put down into the each loop here, which renders it to the DOM. So let's try that. So now this is menu 0. If I click the cars, then the old menu empties out and this new one comes in. Now, the next thing we need to do is when we click on one of these emojis, we need to get it to show up inside the text area here. So let's work on that. So here's the text area. And in Svelte, when we deal with an input or text area, we want to deal with the directive called bind. And we want to do two-way binding. So we'll do bind value, and we'll bind this value to message. Now, we haven't created this variable yet, so let's go ahead and create that now. And so if we do a reactive console log with message, you can see as I'm typing, the console log is updating immediately. So now that we've done that, the next thing we need to do is when we click on one of these emojis, we want this value to be added to the text area. So here's the span for the emoji. Let's add an on-click event listener. And it'll call a function called add emoji, which we'll go ahead and define up here. And we'll use the event object. And what we'll do is we'll take the message variable, which is an empty string, or perhaps it'll have some text in it. And what we want to do is append whatever we click on, whatever emoji we click on, we want to append it to this message. If we don't do the plus sign, it'll simply replace the message. But we want to, if I type some text here and then I want an emoji right here, I actually want to append that to the end of the message. So plus equals, and then we'll do e.target.text content. And the text content for the emoji, if we come down here, is whatever is between these two span tags, the opening and closing tags. So this will be the text content. So now if I click on this, it gets added to the text area. These are kind of small, so let me just adjust the CSS a bit. Good, and then we can still type text in here. If we click on it, it gets appended to it. So now let's deal with the send button. So now we have our message and now we're ready to send it out. So here's the button, and the button is sitting inside a form element. So rather than putting our event listener on the button, we'll put it on the form. And on form, we'll do on submit. And we don't want the form to do its regular submission, its default submission. So we'll do a modifier and we'll do prevent default. And then on submit, we'll call a function submit message. Let's go ahead and define that. And perhaps on this one, what we want to do is console log a message. And so now if I type something, add a few emojis, and then click send, you can see the message, and then it actually types out the message has been sent. So that's just a simple thing we can do. The other thing we probably want to do is we want to empty this out after we're sending it. So the way we can do that is by coming down to the text area, and we're binding the value, but we can also bind to this. This refers to this element here. And we'll bind this to a variable that we'll create called text box. This is a lot like doing document.querySelector text area. So we can do it this way in Svelte, where we just use this bind to this, and then we actually bind it to a variable. Now we can just include the variable's name. Now we can get to the value property, which is the value of this text area, and set it to an empty string. And then the other thing we probably want to do out on submit is take our message and put that back to an empty string as well. So I'll type a message. Now, as soon as I click send, here, let me clear this. As soon as I click send, this gets cleared out. This message shows up. And now I can do another message. And the old message has been cleared out, so it won't get appended to that old message. So the new one comes in. I click send again. This shows up. This clears out. And the message variable clears out. So that's how you can make an emoji keyboard menu with various menu sets in here and have it show up inside a text area using Svelte.